A number of questions, of course, on some of the longer-term trajectory, what we do with inflation, and whether it means that central banks will be taken on the back foot. But overall, what do you see as correlation between what central banks should worry about when it comes to asset prices? Are they just mismanaged at the moment?
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the floor. Well, we do. First of all, it's important to explain that we take the picture of the French financial system every 6 months. And this is the risk we put at the top this time. It's not an exceptional warning or whatever. We all know that we have supporting financial conditions. It is something we decided last year in order to make sure that our economies can resist. And supportive financial conditions are boosting market valuations. So we look at it carefully. But we don't consider that it is something that is not under control. We observe that, of course, when there is a lot of liquidity, if there would be an abrupt downturn, some funds could use that leverage. Could have trouble. But as your picture shows, we also have other structural issues. They were there before the crisis, and they are still at the top of our agenda: climate, cyber, high debt.
What are the risks, the systemic risks? How acute are those as central banks around the world adjust to higher inflation and start to turn towards a more restrictive policy?
Well, we all know that climate transition, to take just this example, is going to require huge investments. And of course, the price of some assets will be changed through all the transition from a carbonized economy to a greener one. So this is one of the things we are looking at very carefully from also the financial stability perspective in our macroprudential work. We organized last year a stress test, for example, for our banks. The SSM is going to organize a green stress test in 2022. So we'll look at it, but we would not deny that such a change will have an impact on asset prices and on prices. As Isabelle Schnabel said during the weekend, we observe this, but we are definitely convinced that this transition is also an opportunity for business and will also create growth and returns for the companies engaging.
Sylvie, can you just talk us through exactly what your main concern for asset prices is? Is there a correction that we could see in the CAC 40 or certain sectors, and what could be done to mitigate that kind of risk?
Well, if you observe how the CAC finished last year, it's not a matter of worry immediately. You perfectly know that this year will be important in terms of monetary policy. We observe carefully what the Fed is going to decide, what the Bank of England is going to decide, but the ECB will go its own way, taking into account also the very heterogeneous situation of the euro area.
One concern that you highlight is the leverage in investment funds. How does that fit into the picture historically, the historical context of that, and how concerned are you?
Well, we try to learn from the crisis, and what we observed at the beginning of the sanitary crisis make us aware of potential risks. And there is a long development. These are very complex issues. I don't want to sum it too much, but for the people who want to look at it in our report that was published yesterday and that is on the website of the Banque de France, we, for example, look at the consequence of Archegos defaults at the end of March 2021. We look at all the leverage used by investment funds. So we do the job. And we will see what is going to happen in a context that may be quite different. If I may, one word, we don't even know, and this is not the competence of a central bank, we don't even know how the sanitary situation is going to evolve.
So would you quantify, Madame Goulard, this as at crossroads? Is this a trickier moment for financial markets and central banks than we've seen in the last 5-6 years because of all of these things at play and the fact that there could be a policy mistake or some kind of shock to the system?
One always has to be prudent in this job, but to be honest, what we experienced at the end of March 2020 was really a specific moment where we had no treatment, no idea on how things will develop. And we did our best, at least. And there was, for the first time, a parallel work from central banks and governments. If you look at 2 years back, where there was no virus, this virus was unknown, we had no vaccines, and where we are now, I'm not saying that everything is fine, but we managed to cope with this challenge. So I would not say that we are now in a moment which is worse. Once again, I would like to insist on the structural issues. We mentioned also cyber in this paper. We mentioned debt, because this paper is looking at the French situation. It is great that public authorities reacted last year. You need to have some margin of maneuver when you are in charge if there was something new to come. Nobody knows which kind of crisis. You mentioned just before the geopolitical situation, which is quite tense. So we need to have the French debt under control, to keep it under control for the next generations.
Okay, the need to have that resilience. And one of the key themes, of course, that central banks are wrestling with is inflation, 5%, a record high for the Eurozone for the month of December. Is there a risk, Madame Goulard, that the ECB is behind the curve on this?
Well, we know that we have been fighting to push the inflation up for years, and it was not easy. And we still have all the structural elements like aging society. You may remember that some years ago, this was considered a very important element. So we observe, after a shock of a huge magnitude, that inflation is going up. And we will take all necessary measures. It was repeated by Christine Lagarde to respect our mandate. With the strategic review, the target is around 2%, and we will do what is necessary. But I'm not in charge of monetary policy. Ask my governor, if you want, to have more details on that.
Going back, Sylvie, to some of the structural problems that you mentioned in this extremely interesting report, and I urge everyone to go and read it, is, of course, debt and climate change. How do we deal with debt? Is there a worry that market and bond vigilantes will latch on to this in the shorter term unexpectedly?
I would not deny that we need unprecedented investments. And I insist it's a change that requires from companies and also households, from all of us, changes in our behaviors, and we need to finance it. The good news from Glasgow, the COP26 in November, was that there is a great awareness among financing institutions. There was the launch of the grants initiative, which is the initiative of private sector to move to net zero. So we will need private investment. And of course, public authorities will need to take their part. But I remind you that a large part of the fund created after the pandemic in Europe, the Next Generation EU public the new debt issued in common, it's the first time with this magnitude that we issue debt, is dedicated for 1/3 to greening, which has not directly to do with the pandemics, but it is because we don't want just to restore confidence, to go back to the pre-COVID situation. We want to look at the future. And these are also amounts that will allow a country like Italy, France, and all the countries benefiting to invest in future-oriented, decarbonized assets and companies.
You also highlight the cybersecurity risks, and you've touched on those. But what is the gap that exists now in terms of the risk and the preparedness of financial institutions when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, we insist on this gap, and you're perfectly right to stress it. We are happy, and it's the reason why I can participate in your meeting, for example, this morning. We are happy that digitalization we made a quantum leap, not only because of the pandemic, but also because of the pandemic, with home working, with less reluctance to use digital for medical appointments or whatever. So this is positive, and we should also see the positive side of all this. So we know that the society is digitalizing more and more, but of course it creates a risk. And what we observe is that some companies have invested, are aware, some others not yet sufficiently. So last year we organized for the Paris Financial Center a large exercise where we try to get used to the risk, and we check as public authorities that the institutions are well prepared, the best possible. There is no 100% safe situation. We should not say that.
Madame Goulard, today is also the first day where we have a new Bundesbank president. Are you expecting him to be as hawkish on inflation as his predecessor?
No, I would say welcome to Joachim Nagel. And to be honest, I think we should stop putting the blame on the Germans. I mean, we all have the same treaties. We all have the same rules. And there is a collective body, the Governing Council, deciding for the euro area as a whole. So, willkommen, Joachim, and good luck.